Sarpy County invested $30,000 in a home solar system that will save on electric bills and feed power back into the grid.
Well, that sounds neighborly, but it's not allowed in their neighborhood. Mike McKnight tells us about a covenant dispute coming to light.
The subdivision is called Liberty, but John and Kelly Bowling are shocked to be notified they weren't free to install solar panels and theirs must come down.
The reason why I don't think it's fair is because I don't think it's that much of an eyesore, right? I mean, it's not detracting from the look and appeal. You can barely notice it from the street.
The neighborhood doesn't have an elected HOA yet, so Liberty Land enforces covenants and above-ground pools, sheds, and solar panels are prohibited. So the Bowlings have until June 1st to remove their roof system or face legal action.
And this is a new development, and I'm just guessing that there's going to be more people that want to put up solar panels.
Debbie Roberts, who lives up the street, says the solar panels don't reflect badly on the neighborhood.
No, I think that's a very worthwhile thing to do. And probably, if I had the money, I'd also be driving an electric car and might probably have solar panels myself.
Developer Denny Van Morligan makes the call on covenant violations and says he sent a removal notice to another homeowner for a shed up the street. But a neighbor also complained about solar panels, and not just on one house. A neighbor across the street from the Bowlings received a similar letter telling them they need to remove their solar panels, but that demand has been taken to court. A trial date hasn't been set, though the neighbor's attorney claims his clients hadn't been properly informed of the covenants. The Bowlings have a similar argument.
There's nothing I remember ever signing. There was nothing that we were presented as far as you have to abide by these rules.
The developer says at closing, the title company provides a home buyer with covenants, usually in an email link that they should have read.
Do not remember seeing that before.
The declarant, as the covenant enforcer is called, says it's unfortunate to demand removal of solar panels, but he can't make any exceptions or more will follow.
We should draw a line delineating those from, sheds, pools, things like that.
Nebraska State Senator George Duncan introduced a bill in the legislature that, if passed, would block a homeowners association from enforcing covenants that ban solar energy panels in a neighborhood.
From the analysis that I've done, solar panels actually do increase property value on a regular basis. And so I don't see any good reason to prohibit solar panels.
The bill is in committee and chances of a vote this session are dim.
So flat, you can't see them.
So like their neighbors, the Bowlings face a possible legal fight to keep their solar panels.
The reason why we called you is just awareness. We don't want other people to fall in the same situation that we're in.
Hoping to save $80 a month on electricity, the Bowlings may have to spend thousands to remove their panels, but they want to energize the debate.
You can't see them at all.
Over HOA covenants that ban home solar systems. Near 36th and Capehart, Mike McKnight, 6 News.
And the developer tells Mike the June 1st deadline can be pushed back with a written promise that the panels will be removed in a reasonable time.
And he says signs will be installed at entrances to the subdivision, reminding homeowners to check covenants before making additions to their property.